Have you ever noticed how your mind refuses to slow down, especially at night when the world gets quiet, your thoughts get louder? You replay conversations, imagine problems that haven't happened, and search for answers that never fully arrive. And the more you try to stop thinking, the harder it becomes. Most people believe overthinking is a sign of intelligence or deep concern, but psychology shows something different. Overthinking is not about thinking too much. It's about the brain trying to feel safe. The human brain is designed to predict the future. When it senses uncertainty, it increases mental activity to reduce risk. Thinking becomes a form of control. If the mind can analyze every possibility, it believes it can prevent danger. But this strategy backfires. Instead of clarity, the result is exhaustion. Overthinking often appears when you care deeply about relationships, about decisions, about outcomes you can't fully control. The brain treats uncertainty as a threat, so it keeps looping, hoping the next thought will finally bring relief. What makes overthinking so powerful is that it feels productive. You feel busy, engaged, responsible. But movement inside the mind does not always lead to resolution. Sometimes it only creates noise. The real problem is not the thoughts themselves. It's the belief that thinking will make the feeling go away. When the brain doesn't get the relief it expects, it tries harder, and the loop continues. In this talk, we'll explore why the mind refuses to rest, why silence feels uncomfortable, and how understanding the brain's need for safety can finally bring calm. Because peace doesn't come from thinking less, it comes from seeing thinking clearly. Overthinking is often misunderstood as a problem of excess thought, but psychology shows it is better understood as a safety behavior. The brain overthinks not because it enjoys mental noise, but because it believes that thinking will protect you. When the brain senses uncertainty, unpredictability, or emotional risk, it increases cognitive activity in an attempt to regain control. This response is automatic and deeply rooted in survival mechanisms. The human brain evolved to anticipate danger. In early environments, failing to predict a threat could mean serious harm. The mind learned to scan for patterns, replay events, and imagine possible futures as a way to reduce risk. This predictive ability kept humans alive. However, in modern life, many threats are abstract rather than physical. Social rejection, failure, and uncertainty trigger the same protective systems, even though they do not pose immediate danger. When something feels unresolved, the brain treats it as unsafe. Uncertainty becomes a signal that something is unfinished or potentially harmful. Overthinking emerges as the brain's attempt to close the gap. The mind believes that if it can just analyze the situation more deeply, it will find certainty and relief. This is why overthinking often targets situations that matter emotionally. Relationships, decisions, self image, and future plans are common triggers. These areas involve unpredictability and emotional stakes. The brain responds by increasing mental activity, hoping to create a sense of safety through understanding. Thinking becomes a substitute for action or acceptance. When the brain cannot act to remove uncertainty, it thinks instead. This gives the illusion of control. The mind feels busy, which temporarily reduces anxiety. But because thinking cannot eliminate uncertainty completely, the relief is short lived. Overthinking is reinforced because it works in the short term. When you analyze a problem, you feel engaged rather than helpless. This engagement signals to the brain that you are doing something about the threat. The brain rewards this with a small reduction in anxiety. Over time, this creates a habit. Whenever uncertainty appears, thinking intensifies automatically. The brain does not distinguish between useful thinking and repetitive thinking. It measures effort, not outcome. As long as you are mentally active, the brain assumes protection is happening. This is why people can think for hours without resolution. The brain is not trying to solve the problem efficiently. It is trying to feel safe. Overthinking also increases when emotional regulation is low. When the nervous system is already activated by stress, fatigue, or emotional strain, the brain becomes more sensitive to uncertainty. Small triggers feel larger. The mind reacts by scanning for threats and replaying scenarios. Silence can feel uncomfortable because it removes the illusion of control. When thinking stops, the underlying feeling remains. The brain interprets this as vulnerability. To avoid that vulnerability, it generates more thoughts. Mental noise becomes a defense. Many people try to stop overthinking by forcing distraction or suppression. This often backfires. When thoughts are pushed away, the brain interprets this as danger being ignored. It increases the signal. Overthinking becomes louder. The brain's need for safety explains why reassurance seeking often accompanies overthinking. Asking others for validation temporarily reduces uncertainty. But because the safety comes from outside, it does not last. The brain demands more reassurance. Keeping the loop alive, overthinking also connects to perfectionism. Perfectionism is another safety strategy. If everything is perfect, nothing can go wrong. The brain uses excessive thinking to prevent mistakes. This increases mental load and exhaustion. The more a person values certainty, the more they overthink. The brain equates certainty with safety. When certainty is unavailable, thinking escalates. Modern life offers endless variables and constant information, overwhelming the brain's predictive systems. Understanding overthinking as protection changes the relationship with it. Instead of seeing the mind as the enemy, you see it as overworked. The brain is trying to help using outdated tools. Safety is not created by more thinking, it is created by tolerance. When the brain learns that uncertainty is survivable, the need for protection decreases. This learning happens through experience, not logic. Allowing uncertainty without reacting teaches the brain that silence is not dangerous. Each moment of non response reduces the urgency of thought. Over time, the brain recalibrates. Overthinking fades not when you solve every problem, but when the brain no longer believes that constant thinking is required to keep you safe. The mind rests when it learns that uncertainty does not equal danger and that you can exist comfortably without having every answer in advance. The mind loops when uncertainty feels threatening because the brain is designed to reduce the unknown, not to tolerate it. Uncertainty creates a gap between what is happening now and what might happen next. That gap activates the brain's threat detection systems. When the brain cannot predict outcomes clearly, it treats the situation as potentially dangerous, even if nothing bad is actually happening. The brain relies on prediction to feel safe. It constantly asks what will happen next and how to prepare. When answers are unclear, the brain increases mental activity to search for certainty. Thoughts repeat, scenarios multiply, and the same questions return again and again. The looping is not a mistake, it is an attempt to close the gap created by uncertainty. Uncertainty is uncomfortable because it removes control. Control gives the brain a sense of stability. When control is lost, the brain looks for substitutes. Thinking becomes that substitute. By replaying events or imagining futures, the brain feels like it is doing something to prevent harm. This is why the mind loops more around situations you cannot immediately resolve, waiting for a response, making an important decision, facing unclear outcomes, or dealing with emotional ambiguity all create uncertainty. The brain reacts by cycling through thoughts, hoping repetition will produce clarity. The loop strengthens because uncertainty rarely disappears through thinking alone. The brain expects relief but does not receive it. When relief fails to arrive, the brain interprets this as insufficient effort and increases thinking further. This creates a feedback loop where more thinking leads to more uncertainty awareness. The mind also loops because uncertainty threatens identity. When outcomes are unclear, the brain cannot update its self story. It does not know who you will be or how you will be seen. This ambiguity feels unsafe. Thinking becomes a way to stabilize identity temporarily. Uncertainty triggers emotional discomfort. Instead of feeling the discomfort directly, the brain shifts attention into thinking. Thoughts distract from emotion. This creates the illusion that thinking is solving the problem when it is actually avoiding the feeling. The brain is especially sensitive to social uncertainty. Not knowing how others feel about you or how you are perceived activates deep survival instincts. Social unpredictability once meant risk of exclusion. The mind loops to predict reactions and protect belonging. Modern environments amplify uncertainty. Information overload creates more possibilities, not fewer. The brain struggles to process competing options. Each option introduces a new uncertain outcome. The mind loops as it tries to evaluate them all. The loop persists because the brain is uncomfortable with open endings. It prefers closure. When closure is unavailable, it repeats the question rather than accept the unknown. Acceptance feels like giving up control, which the brain resists. Attempts to force certainty increase the loop. The harder you try to think your way out, the more the brain signals that something is wrong. This intensifies the sense of threat and fuels more thinking. The mind loops because uncertainty feels like danger, not because it actually is danger. The brain reacts to the feeling, not the facts. It does not distinguish between emotional threat and physical threat. When uncertainty is met with resistance, the loop tightens. When uncertainty is allowed, the loop weakens. Allowing uncertainty sends a new signal to the brain that danger is not present. The brain learns through experience. Each time uncertainty exists without harm, the brain updates its expectations. Over time, uncertainty loses its power to trigger loops. The mind rests when uncertainty no longer feels threatening. Rest comes not from answers when the brain learns that it can exist without knowing everything. The need to loop dissolves naturally. Overthinking is reinforced by the brain's reward system because thinking feels like progress even when it isn't. The brain is not designed to distinguish between real action and mental simulation. When you think about a problem, the brain releases small amounts of dopamine, the same chemical involved in motivation and reward. This creates the sensation that something useful is happening, even if nothing in the real world changes. Dopamine is not only released when you achieve something, it is released when you anticipate improvement or resolution. Overthinking exploits this system. Each new thought carries the promise that the next idea might finally solve the problem. That promise alone is enough to keep the brain engaged. This is why overthinking can feel addictive. The brain learns that thinking produces stimulation. In moments of boredom, stress, or emotional discomfort, the mind returns to thinking because it offers immediate engagement. Even negative thoughts provide stimulation, which the brain prefers over emptiness. The brain also confuses thinking with preparation. From an evolutionary perspective, mental rehearsal helped humans survive. Imagining threats and responses increased readiness. Modern problems rarely require this level of rehearsal, but the brain still uses the same mechanism. It treats thinking as protective work. Each time you overthink, the brain receives a signal that the behavior is useful. Neural pathways strengthen through repetition. The more often a thought pattern is used, the more automatic it becomes. Over time, the brain defaults to overthinking without conscious choice. Overthinking is reinforced because it reduces short term anxiety. When the mind starts looping, it temporarily distracts from emotional discomfort. This relief reinforces the behavior. The brain learns that thinking reduces distress even if the relief is brief. The problem is that the relief never lasts. The underlying emotion remains unresolved. When it resurfaces, the brain returns to thinking again. This cycle strengthens over time, creating habitual overthinking. Modern life intensifies this reinforcement loop. Constant stimulation trains the brain to seek engagement at all times. Silence and stillness feel uncomfortable. When there is no external input, the brain generates internal noise through thinking. Digital environments reward analysis, comparison, and prediction. Scrolling, planning, and evaluating all stimulate the same circuits as overthinking. The brain becomes accustomed to constant mental activity. The brain also mistakes overthinking for intelligence. Complex thoughts feel sophisticated. Simple acceptance feels passive. The brain prefers activity that feels effortful and important. Even if it produces no results, overthinking persists because the brain is risk averse. Doing nothing feels dangerous. Thinking feels safer. Even when thinking causes distress, it feels like protection against failure or regret. The brain is biased toward action over rest. Mental action counts as action. Stillness feels like vulnerability. Overthinking fills that gap. Attempts to stop overthinking often fail because they remove the brain's source of stimulation. When thinking is suppressed, the brain experiences withdrawal. This creates discomfort, which pushes the brain back into thought loops. The solution is not to eliminate thinking, but to reduce its reward value. When thinking no longer produces emotional relief or stimulation, the brain gradually lets go. This happens when attention shifts from thoughts to sensations. Physical awareness provides grounding without reinforcing mental loops. The brain receives input without overactivation. Overthinking weakens when thinking is seen clearly as a behavior, not as identity. Thoughts lose authority when they are observed rather than followed. The brain learns from outcomes, not instructions. Each time you choose not to engage with a thought and nothing bad happens, the brain updates its model over time. Thinking becomes optional rather than automatic. Rest emerges when the brain no longer expects reward from thinking. Silence stops feeling empty and starts feeling safe. The mind settles not because it is forced to stop, but because it no longer needs to stay busy to feel protected. Overthinking persists because the brain treats uncertainty as a threat and believes constant thinking will reduce that threat. The human brain evolved to prioritize survival, not peace. Anything unknown is interpreted as potential danger. When an outcome is unclear, the brain activates stress responses and pushes the mind to analyze. predict, and rehearse possibilities. Uncertainty creates a sense of loss of control. Overthinking is the brain's attempt to regain control through mental activity. Even if no real control is gained, the act of thinking itself provides the illusion of safety. The brain prefers a false sense of control over none at all. This is why the mind replays conversations, imagines future scenarios, and revisits past mistakes. Each loop is an attempt to prevent future pain. The brain believes that if it thinks enough, it can avoid regret, embarrassment, or failure. The problem is that most modern uncertainties cannot be solved through thinking. Social outcomes, other people's reactions, future events, and chance variables remain unpredictable. The brain does not accept this easily. It continues thinking because it has not received closure. The brain dislikes open loops. Incomplete stories demand attention. When there is no clear resolution, the mind keeps returning to the same thoughts, searching for an ending that does not exist yet. Overthinking also increases when responsibility feels high. The more you care about an outcome, the more the brain tries to control it. Important decisions trigger intense mental activity because the cost of being wrong feels high. This is why people overthink relationships, careers, and identity. These areas affect belonging and survival at a deep level. The brain treats them as life or death even when they are not. Overthinking is reinforced by fear of mistakes. The brain assumes that thinking longer will reduce error. In reality, excessive thinking often reduces clarity. The mind becomes cluttered with possibilities instead of grounded in action. The brain also overestimates its ability to predict the future. It assumes that if it can imagine every scenario, it will be prepared. This creates endless loops because the future has infinite variables. Stress amplifies this process. When cortisol levels rise, the brain shifts into threat mode. Creative thinking decreases. The mind narrows its focus and repeats familiar thought patterns. Overthinking becomes rigid rather than flexible. Sleep deprivation, emotional exhaustion, and chronic stress all weaken the brain's ability to disengage. The mind loops not because the problem is complex, because the brain lacks the energy to let go. Overthinking is also learned behavior. Many people were praised for being thoughtful, careful, or analytical. The brain associates thinking with competence and responsibility. Letting go feels irresponsible. Cultural messaging reinforces this belief. Productivity, planning, and optimization are valued. Rest is often framed as laziness. The brain internalizes the idea that constant mental effort is necessary. The mind also uses overthinking to avoid emotion. Feeling uncertainty often brings fear, sadness, or vulnerability. Thinking feels safer than feeling. The brain chooses analysis over emotional exposure. This avoidance keeps the cycle alive. Emotions remain unprocessed, so the mind returns to thinking whenever they resurface. Overthinking becomes a shield. The brain is not aware that overthinking increases anxiety. It only knows that thinking feels like action. It continues the behavior because it does not receive immediate negative feedback. Breaking this pattern requires changing how uncertainty is perceived. When uncertainty is tolerated instead of resisted, the brain reduces its alarm response. Thinking naturally slows. This does not mean ignoring problems. It means accepting that some outcomes cannot be controlled mentally. The brain learns that uncertainty does not equal danger. When action replaces rumination, the brain receives real feedback. Small steps provide clarity that thinking never does. The mind settles when it sees progress in reality. The brain adapts through experience. Each time uncertainty is faced without catastrophic consequences, the threat response weakens. Overthinking loses its purpose. Rest returns not when answers are found, but when the brain learns that it does not need answers to remain safe. Overthinking ends when the brain learns that stillness is safe and does not require constant mental activity to prevent harm. The restless mind is not broken, it is trained. For years, the brain has been conditioned to believe that thinking equals protection, effort, and responsibility. Silence has been interpreted as danger, laziness, or loss of control. The brain adapts to what it repeatedly experiences. If the mind has spent years filling every quiet moment with thoughts, stillness will initially feel uncomfortable. The brain expects stimulation. When it does not receive it, it produces noise. This is not failure, it is withdrawal from a learned pattern. The nervous system plays a central role in overthinking. When the body is tense, the mind stays active. Mental rest cannot occur in a body that feels unsafe. Overthinking is often a signal of an overactivated nervous system rather than a cognitive problem. When the body remains in fight or flight mode, The brain stays alert. Thoughts become repetitive and intrusive. The mind scans for threats, even when none are present. This state cannot be resolved through reasoning. Calm thinking emerges from physical safety. When breathing slows, muscles soften, and posture relaxes, the brain receives signals that danger has passed. Thought intensity decreases naturally. This is why grounding practices are effective. Sensory awareness shifts attention from abstract thinking to direct experience. The brain engages with the present instead of imagined futures or reconstructed pasts. Stillness is not emptiness, it is a different form of engagement. The brain receives input without needing to analyze or predict. This reduces cognitive load. Overthinking weakens when attention is placed on sensation rather than interpretation. Feeling the breath, noticing contact with the ground, or observing ambient sounds anchors the mind. The brain also learns through contrast. When stillness is experienced as peaceful rather than threatening, the brain updates its expectations. Silence no longer signals danger. This process takes repetition. The brain does not trust new patterns immediately. Each time stillness is chosen and nothing bad happens, neural pathways adjust. Overthinking also decreases when identity shifts. Many people see themselves as thinkers. Letting go feels like losing part of who they are. The brain resists identity change. When thinking is no longer tied to self-worth, mental rest becomes acceptable. The mind does not need to prove intelligence through constant activity. The brain also relaxes when boundaries are created around thinking. Designated times for reflection prevent thoughts from spilling into every moment. The brain learns that it does not need to stay active all the time. Sleep plays a critical role. Overthinking thrives in fatigue. A tired brain cannot regulate attention effectively. Rest restores balance. Digital overload keeps the brain in a reactive state. Constant information trains the mind to scan and evaluate. Reducing input allows mental space to emerge. Overthinking also ends when action replaces rumination. Movement grounds the mind, physical activity shifts focus outward and reduces mental loops. The brain learns from embodied experience. Walking, stretching, or engaging with the environment provides clarity without analysis. Emotional processing is essential. Overthinking often hides unexpressed feelings. When emotions are acknowledged and felt, the need for mental distraction decreases. The brain avoids feelings it believes are overwhelming. When emotions are met gently, they pass. Thinking loses its role as a shield. Stillness becomes sustainable when it is associated with relief rather than vulnerability. The brain begins to seek it instead of resisting it. This does not mean eliminating thought. It means restoring balance. Thinking becomes a tool rather than a default state. The mind becomes quieter when it no longer needs to guard against imagined threats. Awareness replaces vigilance. Over time, silence feels familiar. The brain rests not because it is forced to stop thinking, but because it no longer needs to stay busy to feel safe. Overthinking doesn't stop because you finally think the right thought. It stops when you realize that your mind was never meant to carry your life on its back. Thinking was designed to solve specific problems, not to protect you from every possible future. When it tries to do that, it exhausts itself and you along with it. The truth is, your mind learned to overthink because it thought it was helping you. It learned that worry equals care, that analysis equals responsibility, that mental effort equals safety. And once you see that, the relationship with your thoughts changes. You stop fighting them. You stop obeying them. You stop treating them like commands. Rest doesn't come from control, it comes from trust. Trust that you can feel uncertainty without fixing it. Trust that discomfort won't destroy you. Trust that life can move forward even when your mind is quiet. When you stop using thought as armor, you discover something surprising. You are still here. You are still capable. You still respond when action is needed. And in the spaces between thoughts, there is clarity that effort never produced. A calm mind is not an empty mind. It is a mind that knows when to engage and when to step back. A mind that understands it doesn't need to rehearse life to live it. When that understanding settles in, rest stops being something you chase. It becomes something that naturally returns when the mind no longer feels responsible for holding the world together.